G'day, I'm Gary from Southern California. Recently I finished building this raised bed. I wanted to create a stone masonry appearance. I think I've got it pretty close. I used simple items that are readily available, like some plastic bags and some cardboard boxes. And in this video I'll show you how I put this all together. I wanted to create an area that's a little elevated from the ground around it, so that I could give my plants some drainage. I also wanted to resolve an issue with hand watering. I use a garden hose. I have my existing papaya plants, so I didn't want to go too high, but I wanted something so that when I watered, I could drag the hose across it and the hose wasn't going to get snagged and tangled. It functions as a really good hose guard. The hose simply glides right around it. To prepare the material for my formwork, I took some 2x4s, I ripped them in half using my table saw. Then on my radial arm saw I cut them to 18 inches long and I added a point to them. You could do this with a 2x1 and a handsaw. That would work out just the same. For the cardboard, I took some cardboard boxes. I cut them down to 12 inches wide. I followed the lines of the corrugations, so the corrugations run this way. The reason I did that was so that when I laid this out, I could take a ruler, I could follow the corrugations with a Phillips head screwdriver and just press it down and collapse the cells. So I'm not trying to damage this cardboard, I just want to crush the cells so that when I set it up, I was able to bend it into the shape that I wanted. Once I had all my supplies prepped, I was ready to go. I started the bed off by laying out some repurposed collar blocks. I took these from one of my ponds. I did some renovations over there so I could repurpose these to start the wall off. I made these collar blocks to hold the pond liner in place. Later on I changed the design. I wanted to add extra blocks so that I could put in a solar fountain and so that I could direct the water up to the top of the block, and as it ran down, it ran back into the pond. To do that, I simply removed some of these blocks. In the space I added a new bag of wet concrete, and what I ended up with was this new profile. Because it's matching up with the blocks around it, it clicks back in place and it holds together tightly. The blocks that I removed from here, I was able to use for this project. So you can reconfigure your edging or your raised bed whatever way you want. You can change your mind later on. You can add to it. You could change the shape and profile. So it's very versatile. The first piece of cardboard went in the center, and the second one I put on the outside. They're about 8 inches wide by 5 or 6 inches tall and 8 or 9 inches wide or long. So each one of these weighs approximately 22 to 23 pounds. So they're easy enough to lift up. I poured this doing one section at a time, and when I came to the end, I took a bag filled with sand and I wedged it against it, and what I was left with was the profile for the next block. Stacking them in place is fairly easy. It's just a matter of dropping them in, locking them in place. A bit of a kick and they're hard to shift. Before I started, I removed the wood chips simply by hand so that I took everything down to the mineral soil level so that the bottom blocks are sitting on the mineral soil, and that gave me a nice firm surface. A bag of wet concrete doesn't need a lot to hold it into the shape that I wanted. The cardboard stays dry. All the liquid is contained in the plastic bags, so the cardboard is sturdy enough to hold the shape until the concrete sets. After I got the cardboard in the shape that I wanted, I hammered the stakes into the ground. I only hammered them in about 6 inches deep, and then to prevent the cardboard from moving, I used a T50 stapler to staple it to the stakes. Then I was ready to pour the concrete. The bottom of the bags have these V-shaped folds. I've found that if I turn them inside out, there's less chance that the concrete gets caught under the folds because the flat folds face towards the outside of the bags. I use bagged pre-mixed concrete. I mix it to a consistency where it'll hold onto the shovel without dribbling off. If it's a dry day, I'll add extra water. That will give me a little more time to work with it. Then I roll the sides of the bags down to create a bowl, adding as much concrete as I think will be needed to create the size block that I want. When I add the bags to the formwork, I slide them in to make sure that they sit above the gaps between the two blocks below. Then if needed, I top them up to make sure that the top of the bag is going to be level with the blocks that I've already done. I'm looking for a freeform look. I'm not using a spirit level. When I set up the formwork, I got it fairly level, and I'm using the straight edge of the top of the formwork as a guide. After the last one's in place, I put on disposable gloves and I start packing them in by hand. The gloves protect my hands, and they also help to create a smooth surface on the top of the blocks. I gently jiggle the bags around. The concrete settles to the bottom, and it also helps to remove some of the air bubbles. Then, to slow the drying process, I cover the top of the concrete and I pull the bags towards the centre. This helps to round the corners off. I allow the concrete to set for 24 hours before I remove the blocks from the bags. Because the stakes aren't hammered in that far, I can easily remove them by hand and I can reuse them for another job. The cardboard slides right out. Because it's still in good shape, I could either reuse it, or if not, I could compost it. With the formwork removed, I untied the tops of the bags and started to stack the blocks to one side. To remove the blocks, I have to jiggle them around a bit. The interlocking design means that they hold in place really well. For some of my other raised beds, I've used dry stacked concrete construction blocks, or as some people call them, cinder blocks. They've been a lot more maintenance because there's nothing really to hold them together. So the pressure of the soil tends to push them out and make them bulge. Through trial and error, I've found that it's best to remove the blocks from the bags after 24 hours. If I wait any longer, the plastic sometimes gets stuck in crevices and it makes it harder to remove the bags. Sometimes when I remove the bags at 24 hours, they'll come away freely. Other times I might have to take a knife and cut away some of the plastic that gets embedded in the crevices. When I stack them back, I place them in their original position. Because they're all individually poured, that's the only way that they'll go back together. If I ever have to move them, I'll use a marker pen and mark each block, and that way I could piece it together the way it was. I've used this technique for a number of projects. If you're interested, you'll find a link in the description or wait for the end screen, and that will take you to some videos that I've already put up. One of them was a raised bed for my wife Robbie's garden. That one's rectangular in shape. For the formwork I used plywood and 2x4s, so it was a little bit more elaborate and took more time to set up. At first I get them roughly in place, then I remove 2 blocks from the centre. I use those as the keystones and I jiggle around the blocks until I get them locked in place. Then I give them a kick to wedge them in and reduce the gap between the blocks. So that was how easy it was to put together this raised bed. I did it in sections. I had a choice to make the job easier of doing 1 block at a time, 1 bag of concrete at a time, or a whole row at a time. Now that it's done, I've got a very durable, long-lasting raised bed. If I ever want to move it, I can move it. I've got multiple options of extending it or altering it. I think it's a project that pretty much anyone can do. Doesn't take a lot of skill. As I work with this material and with this method, I'm getting better and better at it. I've been able to improve the finish. I've been able to improve everything from the materials that I'm using, which are recycled. I've experimented with different types of blocks and different types of finishes. So these are more of a round natural rock look. These are more of a finished rock look. If you like this video, feel free to leave a comment and please give it a thumbs up. We've got a number of videos on our channel that I've put up using this method. I'll post a link in the description and post some in the end screens. If you're interested, you can go and watch those. With that, thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat what you grow. Goodbye.